Christianity is all for practice. Jeremy Taylor spoke these words in 1662 in a sermon in Dublin, Ireland. The purpose of faith, he said, is fruitful living. Taylor was a priest and bishop and theologian in the Church of England. We celebrate his life and ministry every year on August the 13th. Taylor is one of our Anglican tradition's most influential moral theologians. He stood at the forefront of what we call the Anglican exemplary tradition. We look to Jesus as our example for how to live. Jesus models for us how to be fully human in relationship with God. This practice requires discernment. It focuses on the experience of congregants like you and the distinctive choices you make as you try to imitate Jesus faithfully and fruitfully. Taylor counseled members of his church about what they should do, and he taught them how to reason for themselves to discern Christ-like actions. He emphasized the importance of practical wisdom that we learn over time by imitating Christ in daily life. Through active participation in the life of Christ, we come to know God, Christ, and the nature of God's will. Christianity is all for practice might also be the title of this morning's gospel reading. Jesus highlights the crucial role of doing God's will to experience God's kingdom. In today's reading, we enter the action midstream. Jesus has been in a house teaching his disciples and closest followers. He's just redefined family in the kingdom of heaven. Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers and my sisters. Whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." Following Jesus is indeed all about practice. Today's reading starts as Jesus then leaves the house for the lakeshore to teach a large crowd gathered there. They are not part of his family. They don't yet understand that doing God's will leads to experiences of life in God's kingdom. So he speaks to this crowd in parables. "Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell beside the path, and the birds came and ate them up." The text uses the Greek preposition para, emphasizing that these seeds are landing in the heart of a listener who is walking beside the path, not on the path. This listener is not walking on the path set out by Jesus. This listener is not imitating Christ and therefore doesn't understand the word of the kingdom that's been sowed in her heart. Tennis superstar Chris Evert grew up in a devout and strict Catholic family. She attended Catholic schools and daily Mass for 12 years. Evert first started playing tennis at the age of 5, taking lessons from her father, a professional coach. He recognized her prodigious skill and instilled in her a burning desire and drive to achieve greatness at any cost. Evert progressed quickly through the junior tennis ranks. She played her first senior level tournament at age 14. By 1971, at the age of 16, She appeared as an amateur on the international stage at her first major tournament. There, she became the youngest semifinalist in U.S. Open tennis history. Evert recalls that her religious education embedded strict rules, a fear of judgment, and the need to avoid sin. This turned out to be a two-edged sword. It gave Evert a good girl public image during her entire tennis career, but it also shaped her rigid discipline, self-control, and emotionless composure that led people to nickname her the Ice Maiden. This was the cost that came with Evert's intense focus on achieving tennis greatness. She had few friends. Listen, other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Martina Navratilova arrived on the tennis scene in 1973 at age 16, 2 years younger than Evert. Growing up in communist Czechoslovakia, she had no religious formation. Evert and Navratilova met as teenagers on the tennis circuit and quickly became close friends. They practiced together, shared meals, and frequently did joint press conferences. They formed a highly successful doubles partnership, winning 2 Grand Slam titles by 1976. During these 2 years of their budding friendship, seeds of the kingdom were sown in their hearts. During that time, Evert dominated their head-to-head meetings, winning 16 of their first 20 matches. By 1976, however, Navratilova had substantially improved her physical conditioning and tennis skills. She began to challenge Evert in every one of their singles matches. With this escalation to a fierce on-court rivalry, Evert's friendship with Navratilova wilted in the scorching heat. She concluded that Navratilova was learning too much about Evert's weaknesses in their doubles work together. So she abruptly ended their successful partnership. She distanced herself from Navratilova to protect her status as the top singles player in women's tennis. Listen, other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. This is the disciple who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. The cool and distant relationship between Evert and Navratilova continued for several years. The strain between them intensified when Navratilova's trainer convinced her to harden her heart toward Evert to gain the upper hand in their rivalry. During these years, the cares of the world and lure of fame choked out the seeds of the kingdom that had been sown earlier in their friendship, and the seeds yielded nothing. Despite what might seem to be the desperate arc of this parable, Jesus nevertheless offers hope. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen. Martina finally began to listen. She reached out to Chris in 1986 during a dark time in Evert's personal life. She invited Chris to spend the Christmas holidays with her at her home in Colorado. During that stay, Martina even introduced Chris to her future husband. The seed of God's word was at work in Martina's heart. The word of the kingdom, sowed years earlier in their friendship, finally brought forth grain again 30-fold. In 2010, Chris reciprocated Martina's earlier generosity. She learned Martina's breast cancer diagnosis and provided emotional support with texts and phone calls. The seeds of the kingdom were now beginning to bear even more fruit, 60-fold. In recent years, Chris has been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Martina's cancer has returned, and a second new cancer has been discovered. During these even more challenging times, they have supported one another each step of the way. Through frightening diagnoses and harsh treatments, they've been there for one another. In their many acts of ministry to each other and their rich experiences of friendship in the kingdom of heaven, they have come to know the fullness of human life through Jesus Christ and the life-giving power of God. Chris and Martina have become good soil. The seed of God's word has germinated in their hearts and is bursting forth with grain 100-fold. Hearing God's word of the kingdom of heaven means doing God's will today to enrich people's lives. Christianity is all for practice, and the purpose of faith is fruitful living. In her rector's reflection earlier this week, Beth identified the gift of today's parable. The good news of the parable is realizing that wherever we are in our lives, the generous, indiscriminate sower makes very sure that the seeds of new life, new growth, and abundant fruit are always, always nearby. Let anyone with ears listen.